up, Crankers? My name is Jeff, you're watching TrashWerks, and today we're going to be doing a review on this 2022 Kawasaki Z900, which is the Algaza ZX-6R, because you're going to basically be getting just about everything that you'd need from a ZX-6R on the street, but with a whole lot more comfort and ergonomics and just user friendliness that a ZX-6R is really just not going to get you. The only real downside to it, though, you're not going to be one of those cool kids on the old 636. You're instead going to be a proper right geezer riding your naked bike. But before we get into the ride portion of this, let's go ahead and transfer over to Walkaround, Jeff, where we will take a look at the bike itself and all of the cool little things that make it up. Okay, so here we have the 2022 Kawasaki Z900, and this is actually my personal bike, so I have a lot of experience and have spent quite a bit modding this bike past what comes stock, and I'll point those differences out to you. But for the short and low of it, to start off with the motor, we have Kawasaki's inline-4. It's a 948cc motor, and it produces about 125 horsepower and about 75 pound-feet of torque. And that is more than enough for the street. So just bopping around town, scooting here and there, you're going to be able to get just exactly where you need to go with a little bit more pep in your step and a lot more user friendliness than a ZX-6R. That motor is bolted into a steel tube trellis frame. You do have passenger accommodations on the stock bike, however, I did remove those just because I don't have passengers and I very much enjoy the non-passenger peg look. It does also come stock with a helmet lock, so you can actually put your helmet on here, lock that in, and you are good to go if you wanted to leave your helmet on your bike. I did add Evotech frame sliders on there, even though this bike has clearly never been dropped. And I do also have the Puig side spoiler downforce, I don't remember what they're called, for all that extra downforce feller. Now, the model that I have does not come with a quick shifter. It is manual up and down. However, the new models do come with a quick shifter both up and down. Now, beyond that, the bike itself is actually pretty heavy. It's about 470 pounds. It comes with a 4.5 gallon fuel tank, so I do not have to fill up that often. The bike does typically come with mirrors that go on the stock here. I have swapped those out for some CRG Aero mirrors. I just like the way they look a lot better, but these stock mirrors are actually functionally a lot better. This bike is in, what is it called? Twilight Blue, I think. I have added a little bit of extra flair to it just because I don't really like this color, but it was the only one they had when I got it. And looking down at the controls here, I did add some domino grips. I have some Driven Racing Halo adjustable levers. However, the stock bike does come with adjustable levers from the factory, and I did also add some lever guards. Looking at the front, we get a good look at that Tsugomi styling that Kawasaki always loves to rave about. I have also added in the Puig downforce chin spoiler there for all that extra downforce. Does it really make a difference? I don't know. I can't tell. I did it just for aesthetic. But if we come around here to this side on the front wheel, we'll be able to take a look at what we get for braking. Now, this bike is pretty heavy and it goes very quickly, so you do want to have a decent set of brakes on here. We have a twin disc brake setup here, so you do get one disc on each side, both with some Nissan 2-piston calipers mounted up right there. The new models actually come with radial mounted calipers calipers, which are a little bit better than these sort of traditional mounted calipers. And the SE models, I believe, come with Brembos and steel braided brake lines, whereas this has just the rubber lines. Now, the Z900s come with ABS. I don't believe they actually sell a non-ABS version, so you will get ABS front and back. That's going to contribute to your anti-wheelie as well. You do also get traction control and 3 rider modes with this. As far as suspension goes, you do get adjustable suspension, both front and rear. However, on the SE models, you do get Öhlins branded shocks. These, I don't know what brand they are. I think they're just sort of a generic brand, an OE brand. The standard exhaust on the Z900 is going to be actually very quiet. I have swapped that out. I do have a full system from Black Widow. So up front on the headers, we get rid of the bread box underneath and we come out to this muffler here. It is significantly louder. I have also had this bike tuned by Proven Power Cycles here in now Tampa, Florida, and it does pop and bang. You'll hear that as we ride along. One of my favorite things about these Generation Zs is that the taillight is actually a Z. So you can see we have our little Z there, whereas on the new models, it's sort of just this symmetric design. Either way, I do like the way they look. I have also swapped out the turn signals on this bike. The Kawasaki OE signals work perfectly fine, but they were a little bit big and goofy for me, so I decided to put more money than I should have into some Rizoma turn signals. The bike does come with some Dunlops from the factory. However, currently I have some Michelin Power 5s on here just because I don't really ride this bike that much, and so when I do, I did want to have a little bit extra traction than the standard Dunlops that come on here. I have also gotten rid of my rear passenger seat. I have this Kawasaki OE cowl. You can get them on Amazon, but I got mine directly from Kawasaki. The paint matches perfectly, which would make sense. Sitting in the cockpit, we can see that there is a TFT dash that comes from the factory. The new ones actually have a little bit nicer of a dash that has lane indicators on there, whereas this one, just pretty standard. You can go through odometers, you can change rider modes and settings through here. And if we look over here at the left stock, all of this is aftermarket. The phone mount, the power strip here, all aftermarket, but from the factory you do get mode selectors, you get high and low beams, you get turn signals, horns, all pretty standard. You do also get 4-way flashers, which is nice. And then on the right side, it's very basic. You've got your kill switch, you've got your starter, and that's basically it. Both your throttle and your clutch are cable actuated. There's no electronics on either, no hydraulics on either, so you will be getting a direct feel for what's going on. But with that, we'll go ahead and flip this thing into the on position. We'll start it up, and we will listen to that rumble. All right, let's get a couple of small revs out of the Z900 here and listen to that inline 4. Nice. All right, let's get going. And before we get through the rest of the ride, please remember to like and subscribe to this video if you did find it enjoyable, or if you didn't. I'm going to cover both bases and make you do it anyways. As we pull on corporate curves here, we'll talk about this bike's general handling and agility. And as with most sport bikes and naked bikes, you're not going to believe this, but the bike actually handles really well, especially for street riding. You're not going to have any problem getting this thing around corners or maneuvering it at all. One benefit that you do get from this Z900 as opposed to one of the more super sports like the ZX-6R is that you actually have this big white handlebar here, which makes maneuvering really easy just because you have that extra leverage from having that wide bar as opposed to, being really tucked in with those clip-ons. So you can easily move around and do everything that you need to. Beyond that, I have not taken this particular bike out on track, but from my rides around the street so far, and I've had this bike for, I think, almost 3 years at this point, it's perfectly agile. You're not going to have any problem getting around. The first limit that you're going to really run into on this bike, as with most Kawasaki's, it's going to be the foot pegs. They sit relatively low, and that's mainly just for seating comfort. But, I can still lean off. I can get low if I needed to. Pretend like I'm a street Rossi. But, this bike will be completely fine, but it is made for comfort. Now, what makes this bike particularly more user-friendly on the street as opposed to the ZX-6R is going to be that torque. The Z900 from the factory has a claimed 75-ish pound-feet of torque. I had this tuned at a local power shop here, Proven Power Cycles, and it was making 78 pound-feet of torque, which Yeah, the bike's a little heavy. It's 470 pounds, but that extra bit of torque really does help, especially coming off stops, especially in stop and go traffic. You can really get by doing what you need to do, and having the more upright seating position as opposed to the more tucked and rear set that you would get from the ZX-6R makes it a lot more comfortable around town as well. Coming to stops and coming off of them, super easy on the bike. It's very forgiving. The power band is a straight line. I'll see if I can actually find the dyno charts from this exact bike. I'll put it on screen for you so you can see that it just goes up and to the right. There's no real spikes like you'd get on a Super Sport. It is very, very predictable. So, depending on where you're at in the rev range, that's going to be how much power you get. In terms of acceleration, we'll see exactly what that looks like when we get to the highway Hog Crank, but you get going just fine. That was maybe, like a third throttle. You've got more than enough juice to do anything that you need to. You're hyper maneuverable, passing on the highway, passing on the street. If you need to squeeze in somewhere, it's not hard to do on this bike. When it comes to turning in and doing everything out, this bike is planted, it's stable. You can do just about everything that you need to. The suspension setup on it from the factory is pretty soft. It's a little softer than I'd like. It's completely fine for the street, honestly. You get to absorb some of those bumps a little bit easier, but it does have adjustable shocks from the factory, and the SE variants actually do come with Olin shocks, so that's a little bit better. But if you are going to be going to the track, I've seen people who get away with just, putting in heavier weight fork oil and calling it a day. But from the factory, this thing, again, is a Japanese bike made for Japanese people and also Europeans, and they happen to be a little bit lighter than your average honkin' stonkin' American man like me. So it's a little soft for me. I went in at 212 this morning. That's before all my gear, so the bike is a little soft, it's a little spongy, but again, if you put in heavier weight fork oil, it should feel completely fine, especially if you're going on the track. But you do get adjustability with it, so you get adjustability in both the front and the rear. But as we wait for the light here to do our highway Hog Crank section, I'm going to get out of first here. I'll give a modest tuck and a pretty decent tug on the throttle. And we will get scooting and booting to see how quick this can get up to speed. And it's not going to be a real big shock, but it gets up to speed pretty easily. Like that, we are up to highway speeds, definitely not over. We're going to start our highway section of this ride. Now, as you might be able to tell, there's no windscreen up here. We are eating wind with our full chest. I can feel the wind right above my belly button. That's where it's hitting. You can get taller windscreens for this bike, but to me, defeats the purpose of a naked bike. At that point, I would just get like a Ninja 1000 and, go full sport touring. I wanted something that was a little bit more rowdy and a little bit more street oriented, and so this is just the price that I pay. But honestly, you get used to it. I am perfectly used to wind at all different speeds. It's a pretty standard experience. And on the highway, this motor does exceptionally well. If you need to pass, you can do that. I don't even downshift for most of my passing. I can just stay in 6, and just with a little bit of a pull on the throttle, that's 5 miles an hour with just, half of a tug. So you can do what you need to do on here. It's perfect for any kind of commuting that you'd really need, as long as wind isn't a big deal. The motor itself can do anything that you need to for the street. If you need to commute on the highway, if you need to commute on back roads, city streets, it'll be perfectly fine. The wind is obviously going to be the biggest downside here, just because there's no windscreen. There also aren't that many cargo accommodations. You can find bags from companies like SW Motec but in terms of factory options, there's really not much because, you know, it's a naked bike. You're not really meant to travel long distances with it. That's not its intended purpose. If you wanted to do that, you get a sport touring bike and, you know, be on your way. In terms of mileage, though, this bike actually does pretty well with a full tank of gas. The longest distance I've traveled on this bike was from Tampa to Daytona, and then Daytona back to Tampa, and I think we filled up probably once each way. And that wasn't straight highway both ways. We did highway, we also did back roads, and then on the way back it was, for anyone who knows, I-4 in the afternoon on a weekend. So, you know, not a very fun time, mainly stop and go. But as we are stopped here waiting to make our turn, I can talk a little bit about the body position and ergonomics of this bike. The seat height is relatively low. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. I will pull that up on screen here. But I have about a 30-inch inseam. My boots add maybe 1 inch on top of that. And I'm able to put one foot on the ground and my other foot on the rear brake perfectly comfortably. If I'm on the highway and let's say I'm doing stop and go traffic, I will scoot off to the side a little bit just to make that easier. But, you know, just coming to a stop in traffic, it's perfectly fine. I don't have very long legs. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to follow my dreams of becoming a runway model, but for being a stubby little biker, it works out for me. Is it taller than, let's say, a Ninja 400? Absolutely. You know, I do have to tiptoe this thing to back it in, whereas on the 400 I can flat foot that. And the bike itself is a little bit wider than a Ninja 400 or let's say a ZX-6R, so you do have that to contend with for seat height as well, but generally speaking, you know, not that big of a deal. Uh-oh, too far. In addition to the seat height, the general ergonomics of this bike are very comfortable. The pegs are relatively low, so I mean, I do have a bend in my knee, but I am not scrunched up. They're also pretty neutral. They're basically directly under me, a little bit in front of where my pelvis is. So it's a super neutral position that is very comfortable. On long rides, I really don't feel any kind of discomforts. Again, I'm a bit on the shorter side, so I'm 5'8", my inseam is about 30 inches, and I've, again, ridden this across the state and back, and I haven't felt any major discomfort from it, but someone who is maybe a little bit taller might have some issues with that, but they do also have taller seats that you can get for this bike. What is going on up here?
What the dog doing?
The handlebars are also pretty accessible. Me personally, I have sort of short arms. Again, I'm sort of a stubby person, and I would like them to be a little bit further back, but it's not a huge deal for me. In the normal seated riding position, I'm completely fine. Alrighty, and as we pull onto Yap Avenue, I'm going to complain about this bike. The major complaint that I have with this bike is something that sort of has to do with Kawasaki as a whole. They generally make bikes that are on the more economical side, should we say, which means it's a little bit cheaper, but you're going to get a reliable product that works well, can take abuse. You know, it's not going to be the highest quality, but it's going to be exactly what it is, and you're not going to have to worry about it breaking down or anything like that. And my biggest gripe with specifically this generation of 900 is that it's a little too economical, meaning that you really don't get much out of it. So while you do get, yes, a TFT dash, you get ABS, you get anti-wheelie, you get traction control, different rider modes, adjustable suspension, that's basically it. You know, this bike came out at the same time that you had the MT-09, which had a fully electronic throttle and a 6-axis IMU. It had adjustable front and rear. You had all these different rider modes. You've got, you know, objectively, I think, a nicer TFT dash out of the comparable MT-09 as opposed to this. And what really sucked about it too is that this TFT dash was the same dash unit that was used on all of Kawasaki's other bikes. So think the ZX-10R, and that had so much more information on the dash. It looked a lot better. There were more things that you could do with it, and they just left that off on the Z900. And in addition to that, you also had the hardware components themselves, which Kawasaki, you know, I don't want to say cheaped out, but they didn't opt for the premium option, which I get. I got this bike before the SE model was released. The SE model was released in 23. This is a 22. And so I've got rubber brake line. While I do have two calipers in the front, they're not radial mounted. They're not Brembos. They're not, you know, anything like that. Whereas the SE got that special treatment. And in addition to that, the 900, the MT-09 rather, was doing miles ahead of this. The only thing that Kawasaki really beat the MT-09 out on was just the raw power. But when you compare that to how much the MT-09 weighed compared to the Z900, this was the fattest heavyweight naked bike in the market. It is the heaviest. You really feel that, especially, you know, as it's a lot of it's higher up because of its, you know, this massive gas tank. So that was my main issue. The current generation, the 2025, makes up for all of that. It's a huge deal. You know, you could get the 2025 Z900 for MSRP of either $10,000 to $10,300 US dollars, and that just depends on what color you get. It comes with ABS, it comes with a 6-axis IMU, it comes with radial mounted brake calipers, you know, all of these extra features that I wish I had on this, but I don't. So that's why I'm yapping about that. As we're on this section of road, we are on the country road section, sort of. We're not really in the country, but we're going, you know, between 45 and 50 miles an hour. It's one way each. That's what I think of as a country road. I've had this bike on many country roads, so I'm going to speak from experience here. This bike does perfectly well. I think the wind from 50 to 60 miles an hour is not bad on this bike at all. The worst thing about cruising on this bike, whether it's the highway or whether it's on country roads, is that this bike does not have cruise control. My right hand is always attached to the throttle. That is not by choice. It is because there's no cruise control. Again, the new models do have cruise control, so that is nice, but this generation of Z900 does not. So I've got the old righty-tighty cruise control. But aside from that, the wind isn't bad, especially because with the stock windscreen, it is hitting my stomach. It's hitting my whole body. So it's not really, you know, directed all at my head and buffeting my head back and forth. I'm pretty stable. The shaking that you see on cameras from me talking, if I shut up for a second, it'll be perfectly still. See, perfectly still. And I don't have a fancy helmet on. It's an HJC i10, you know, which I do have a review of, see above, and it's able to buffet that wind and sit perfectly fine. As we are about to pull onto our commuter hell section here, I will talk about what it's like to commute with this bike. To no surprise, this bike is also really nice to commute on. Again, it has 75, 78.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
For a 450-pound bike and a probably not as heavy rider, you're going to be able to bop around completely fine on this thing. The gearing is actually really close together. That's another complaint that someone might have if they're thinking about this as opposed to a super sport. The gearing's a lot closer. This is meant for city bopping. You know, I'm not going to be doing high-speed pulls on the highway. That's just not what this bike is made for. For commuting around town, this bike will do more than enough. It's also very, very naked. So you've got your big old motor honking stonking down there, and there's no pharynx to keep all that heat in. So depending on the day, you will either get a lot of heat hitting you, especially if you're in really stagnant air and stop and go traffic, or if you're on a nice windy day, it actually helps dissipate a lot of that heat out and you actually don't feel a lot of it. But coming to a stop, brakes work just fine. It does have ABS too, which really helps a lot. I have had to do quite a bit of emergency braking on this bike before, and it has saved my tuchus more than once. You know, you never know when there's going to be a patch of gravel. You can't always calculate every escape route, so I love that these things come with ABS, and there are ways to get around ABS if you needed to, especially if you're going to the track, but this is a street bike. Naked bikes are street bikes. I know that a lot of people do race them and put them on track, but they're meant for the street. And can you pop a wheelie in this thing? Absolutely. Am I going to do it? No. Can I do a wheelie? No. Speaking of that heat, I am starting to feel it now. Oh, sweet, sweet air. And coming to another stop again, which is why I call this commuter hell. And this is at an off hour. I'm still hitting these stoplights just because Tampa traffic sucks. Little biker filter just way up there and his little flippy floppies. I know he's got shoes on, but still, shorts, rocking them shorts. Coming off stops, super easy. I would give this bike a lot of flack for not having a quick shifter, which the MT-09 had, but for city riding, it's not a big deal. As you've seen me riding this entire time, I've been just clutchless shifting it up. And it's been completely fine. You can upshift and downshift it really easily once you get used to the gear ratios. Again, they're a little bit shorter than what you'd expect, especially coming off of a Super Sport, which typically have really long gears. So on this bike, once you get used to it, it's really easy to shift up through gears and sort of know what works best where. The engine braking from factory is actually a little bit more than what I liked. It was actually a little jerky once you went fully closed throttle. I had that tuned out of the bike, and that's one of the main reasons that it pops and bangs, is just because there's still a little bit of fuel going when I have that complete closed throttle. But the way that I see it, once you get used to the jerking, and I rode for quite a while before I had this bike tuned, it's basically a free brake, you know. it's a brake pad saver at that point. The clutch is also really easy to operate for this bike, and you do have those adjustable clutch levers, so you can really fine-tune where you want to have that friction zone at. It's really easy for you to modulate. I really do like that. I do like that it is cable actuated. It's really predictable, and same thing with the brakes. They're also really predictable. There is not as much initial bite as I'd like, but a lot of that also has to do with just the braking components themselves, which are fairly easy to upgrade. You know, if you wanted to get steel braided brake lines and pop in some different pads, that's super easy to do. That's a really low skill level thing to do. So I don't really fault the bike for that too much. Again, this bike was really cheap when it came out. And even now, the Z900s are cheaper than the ZX-6Rs. You get the same inline 4 sounds, which actually I think these sound a little bit better than ZX-6Rs. You get much better usability, and it's at a cheaper price. The Z900 SEs, the ones that come with the Olin suspension, with the Brembo brakes, those MSRP for, I think it's about $11,800 as of recording, whereas the ZX-6Rs that have ABS are a little bit higher than that. I think they're right around $12,000. So it's a better deal, and you're getting more power, you're getting more friendliness. So if you are old like me, if your joints hurt like mine do, and if you want to preserve your back, the 900 is a way better option than the ZX-6R. But if you do get a 900, I would say don't get this generation 900, get the new one. It's got so much more, and at a really good price, honestly. The price is amazing to have a pretty complete package for $10,000 MSRP. That's pretty unheard of, especially in today's bike market. Oh, it's so hot. I'm sweating under my boobs. Yeah, as I'm filming this, Puxatony Phil just said that it was going to be 6 more weeks of winter. And I'm convinced that Puxatony Phil is a government plant, because it is 80 degrees here immediately after his prediction. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt. Here we get some stop and go. Clutch only, a little bit of rear brake. My foot's not down. Foot's still not down. A lot of tomfoolery going on up here. Foot's still not down. My foot might have to come down here in a second. No, still not down. And we're good. That whole section, foot never went down. I hovered it, but it did not touch the ground. So having this big handlebar really helps with that slow speed maneuverability. And again, the clutch is really easy to operate on it, just being cable driven. As long as you adjust it to the right position, both the right angle as well as, you know, how far out you want it, it makes it very comfortable. I never really have issues on this bike with using the clutch over an extended period of time as I do with some other bikes that are even adjusted to the right angle. That's going to about cover it for me here on the Kawasaki Z900. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. If you like the video, like it. If you want to subscribe, please do. Help me escape my corporate lifestyle. And be sure to check out my Instagram. I do a lot of taking pictures of motorcycle stuff there. Very fun times, very fun indeed. So be sure to check that out. I'm also on TikTok, and, well, you're seeing me here on YouTube. That's really it so far, so please give me a follow, give me a like, do whatever you need to do, send me smoke signals. I will get back to you if I remember.